back with our legal team, Timothy Parlatore, who you all remember was a former attorney for President Trump, and Brett Tolman, who was a former U.S. attorney himself. Brett, another part of the indictment, the defendant had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim falsely there had been an outcome determinative fraud during the election and that he had won. So they concede that he had the right to have a different opinion, but what? So they throw that in there to try to protect themselves, Brett, but then they violate what they claim they are still protecting.
Yeah, Laura, that's what they're doing. In fact, it was quite a shocking statement when I first read that at the beginning of this indictment. They're giving some, credibility to the notion that a candidate can, say what they want to say. There's freedom of speech, and they can be wrong, and they can even say things that are false. That's longstanding law that has been established in this country. So they give that. And then at the same time, they try to unwind that and go through their legal and factual wrangling to try to pull back those protections and that development of case law over the years. That's when you knew that they were in trouble, and when they were going to be trying to force a round peg into a square hole in this instance, because they start out with that sort of acknowledgement, as opposed to when I drafted speaking indictments, I would start out with the most outrageous conduct of the defendant that was alleged in the indictment, and it would grab you, it would shock you, and it would make the reader understand that this was a very serious case. That didn't happen here.
Tim, another part of the indictment, again, people will have to know that we actually read the indictment and we're actually quoting from it. Each of these conspiracies, which built on widespread mistrust the defendant was creating through pervasive and destabilizing lies about election fraud, targeted a bedrock function of the U.S. government. Tim, to reference destabilizing lies after this Justice Department facilitated the Russian collusion investigation, all the other hits on Trump, the FISA application, the fraud and the filing of those, and the dossier, that didn't destabilize the public's view of the implementation of justice in the United States. That's the standard. Well, then they violated
it. That's a great point. When you think about it, the first few years of his presidency, he was essentially handcuffed because he had everything going on with the Mueller investigation, and it was all ultimately determined to be based on misinformation. I mean, this is an administration that had, at some point tried to create this, position within DHS of a minister of disinformation. And so it really does, come back to that bedrock First Amendment principle of, are we going to start criminalizing you for saying things that we disagree with? And Senator Cotton said it perfectly just a few minutes ago, that you don't have to agree with what Donald Trump or Giuliani said about election fraud to say that this is not something that should be within the purview of the Department of Justice. We don't put people in jail because we disagree with them. We put people in jail because they're dangerous. And
well,
that's just
Putin does. Here. Yeah, Putin does. Xi does. I mean, they put people in jail all the time. They just disappear altogether. I mean, they would love Trump to disappear, I'm sure. Brett, I think they want him in jail.
Well, they skip the trial, too.
Yeah, that's right. They want to skip that. They'd be happy to skip the trial at this point. But, Brett, they want people in jail. And they want Donald Trump in jail. I honestly think that's been their goal from 2015. They didn't want him to win in 2016. They wanted him behind bars. And they wanted to send a message to anyone like Trump who has his views coming down the pike. I think there's a lot of stuff that he'll uncover if he gets back in. They don't want him anywhere near the levers of power. Your reaction to that? I know it's a big statement, but that's my view.
No, you're exactly right. And in fact, that was my first thought when you saw him demand the speedy trial. If they get their speedy trial within 70 days, conviction rates are at 95% in this country on federal cases. You have a judge that will be able to apply the guidelines in the most harsh way, the sentencing guidelines in the most harsh way. They're looking at this not just for, a few months in prison. They are looking to put him in prison for years. And they want to do it as soon as they can, because they've seen what's happened when they just do the charges. And then you get a judge that pushes the case down the road. They know that if they can get to the end of this quickly, then he'll be in prison, be much more difficult for him to run.
I mean, this is the United States of America. I'm just going to say, we are the beacon on the hill for the rest of the world. This is how you do justice. This is how you're supposed to do justice. This is how the equal application, right? Well, we were. Tim, is that in jeopardy tonight?
I think it is. I mean, it's not just this one case, though. It is something that, as a criminal attorney, I've seen, the erosion in DOJ over the past several years, where they are bringing cases that are based on politics and not upon honest and integrity principles of justice. This is perhaps, the most recent and the most public of them, but this happens every single day, where they are putting people in jail and depriving them of their rights and cheating and cutting corners to prioritize convictions over justice. So it is something that, there has definitely been an erosion, and perhaps this is just one of the most public instances of it that the next administration will take to actually change things.
Yeah, well, the rot runs deep at DOJ. Gentlemen, thank you for staying with us for this hour. Joining me now, Ned